Good morning on this Sunday, April 30th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Governor Brian Kemp and other Republican leaders declined their invite to the Georgia GOP convention. Also, possible criminal charges could be filed this summer in the Fulton County 2020 election probe. And after an almost decade-long fight, some Georgia patients are finally able to legally buy medical marijuana. Alita, Phil, Theron, and Martha are all here. The debate and discussion begins right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
This week, President Joe Biden made it official. He will seek a second term. Governor Brian Kemp said this week this is not a time for Republicans to be complacent, as he announced he won't be at this year's state Republican convention.
My opinion is I don't know if we can stand 4 more years of that when you think about what we've been through with 40-year high inflation, disaster at the border that continues to get ignored.
Governor Kemp has been vocal about his belief that Republicans need to move on from 2020, when then President Donald Trump failed to win a second term. Kemp has been careful not to mention Trump by name. The former president publicly blamed Kemp and other state leaders for his loss in Georgia and convinced some of his supporters to run against them in the Republican primary, an effort that ultimately failed. Governor Kemp says he will not attend this year's Georgia GOP convention.
We had the current chairman that, has been working against a statewide ticket. I'm hoping for new leadership at the party and looking forward to working with them in the future. But regardless of how that plays out, I'm going to stay engaged, helping our legislative candidates, helping our nominee in 2024, because if we don't win Georgia, we ain't winning the White House.
This week, Attorney General Chris Carr, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, and Insurance Commissioner John King all also said they'll skip the convention. So, Phil, to you first this week. What does this mean about the Republican Party? How divided is it?
I'm not worried. Obviously, as the Governor Kemp said, he got crossed up with David Schaefer, the current chairman of the party. He's stepping down, and so we're going to have a chairmanship election at the GOP convention. I'll be checking it out over there. But I heard Governor Kemp just a couple days ago speaking, and you had it, Lori, in your package here. He said Republicans have to win Georgia, and he was standing right there with Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones and other officials at the event I was, and they all said we're united. Why? Because of Biden's unpopularity, the Democrats' unpopularity. He was naming it, everything from reckless spending and inflation to open borders, crime, etc. So it's a great unifying theme for Republicans, and I think you'll see a new chairman that everybody will like. And there's nothing wrong with the governor having a leadership pack and all being united to get money, because money is the key for both parties.
Theron.
It's really interesting because, to be fair to Governor Kemp, former Governor Nathan Deal chose not to go to the state GOP conventions as well. But at a time where you hear the governor say, hey, we got to win Georgia, we want to be united, what really is going on here is that Governor Kemp sort of said, all right, I'm going to break away a little bit from the party structure, and I'm going to go and run my own campaign in 2022. And it was a campaign that was about his record, but it was also about diversifying the party. It was about bringing new voters, and he made a conscious effort to go into places that the GOP historically has not gone to. So now, if you have these other state constitutional officers, who some of them are probably going to be next up to run for higher office, deciding not to go, then I wonder how the GOP activists feel. Because in both parties, you have people who really look forward to these conventions. These are people who have been in their state parties and counties all over the state working very hard to recruit candidates, to recruit people to vote for the GOP. So this is a pretty unprecedented move. And I don't want to get too far historical, but I think this is probably the first time that this many Republicans have said that they're not going to a GOP convention.
And Martha, let's talk about that, because in the GOP districts, several Trump candidates and far-right folks were elected chairmen and chairwomen of their districts. So what does that say about the direction of the actual party?
Look, I think that, as I said to a New York Times reporter this week, meetings and conventions are so 20th century. I think we're in a place where we're trying to figure out what is the next way we're going to organize, what is the next way we're going to get the grassroots out. Now, in complete disclosure, I'm a delegate to the Georgia GOP convention, and I'm going because I'm going to vote for Rebecca Yardley for chair, because she has worked through every level of the party and she's been very reasonable. But one of the things that I think is important about this is that you're right. In the, I think it's the 8th district, Candace Taylor was elected, and others, there are takeovers of parties and party structures that are going on across, not unlike what we've seen with Democratic Party structures at different times. But I'm glad you brought up Governor Deal, because Sonny Perdue had an issue too trying to influence the Georgia GOP in his second term. So did Nathan Deal. It hasn't worked well for Republican governors to try to overly influence the Georgia GOP, but I'm telling you what, if they don't get to where they actually get the grassroots out and raise the money, they're going to be irrelevant.
But that's true, because there are, I mean, I think Senator Saxby Chambliss, former Senator Saxby Chambliss, he was booed at the convention. A lot of these more, I would say, mainstream candidates do get booed at these conventions. Melita.
Well, you look at Candace Taylor and her Jesus, Guns, and Babies campaign for governor that received only 4% of the vote, but the people in her district have elected her to be their district chair. And you have to remember how fringy she was. I mean, she wanted the destruction of those monuments in Elberton, and then thanked God when they were blown up by dynamite, according to the GBI. So there are 3 other districts where equally right-wing but perhaps less known people are now in charge of that district coming into this convention. So perhaps the wiser heads are prevailing by staying away.
But the Democratic Party structure has the same problem with the more progressive folks taking over their organization.
I was just going to say,
I'm talking about the structure.
You have extremists on both ends of the spectrum, and they are active in both parties. The mainstream media just doesn't cover the nuts on the Democrat side.
Just real quick, though, but to my point, I don't think you've had this many Democratic officials who are statewide, back in the 90s and the early 2000s, say that they're not going to the Democratic convention. Now, I'm going to be called balls and strikes. I have my own troubles and concerns with my state party, right? And if I'm invited to the convention, especially if I'm a delegate, I'll go. But I think it's monumental. You counted, what, 4 or 5 GOP statewide officers saying they're not going to their convention. That's never happened on the Democratic side.
I want to go on record saying I think they should go. I mean, I think they should go because they represent the whole state. Just like when I spoke to Senator Ossoff on Friday morning on my program, I talked to him about representing the whole state. If they're going to represent the whole state, they probably should go.
And just real quick, to Theron's point, I think it's the Democratic Party has the weakest state chairman of modern political history, Nikema Williams. She's a sitting congresswoman. If she's trying to do a good job in Congress, how does she have time to work the state Democratic Party? I'm glad she's there because it's hurting the state Democratic Party.
Well, Theron and Melita, I'll save you because I want to go back to another issue. There are some notable Georgians who will play high-profile roles in the Biden campaign. Talk about that, Theron.
Well, you know, Georgia is going to, again, be, I think, the most important battleground state for Democrats and for Republicans. Mm-hmm. And when you see that President Biden relaunched his campaign last week, and he named Quentin Fulks, who's from Ellaville, Georgia, who went to Georgia Southern, but more importantly, is a really good guy, smart guy, ran a very moderate campaign here in Georgia for Senator Warnock and won. But also you got a young man named Michael Tyler, whose dad is very well-respected lawyer here, Michael Tyler Sr. But Michael Tyler has been working his way through the Democratic politics in the state of Georgia and nationally. So he has not been named yet, but a rumor has it that he may be named as communications director. And then we're all waiting to see if whether or not former Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms will be a co-chair of the campaign. So really quickly, Lori, I think that you put Quentin, you put Michael, and possibly Keisha in the room. Not only does Georgia become more important, and Martha likes to give me a lot of credit on this, and I take it, I'm the last Democrat to actually run a campaign for former President Barack Obama to win Florida. Now I think Florida, North Carolina, and possibly other states become in play.
Martha, you were shaking your head.
Keisha Lance Bottoms doesn't help anyone in Democratic politics right now.
Oh,
I know
Martha.
you're so kind. You are so
Martha.
kind. Look, it's not I don't dislike her. It's just record-wise, she doesn't help anyone.
But is it fair to say that she did? I mean, to go work in the White House, to be next to the President of the United States, to possibly be considered to be a national co-chair of a campaign, that's a pretty big deal politically.
It's a big deal politically, but she didn't last very long in that job in D.C. And look, I'm not trying to be critical, but there's so many good people besides Keisha Lance Bottoms that could be in there.
She may not
take it.
Well, it was always announced that Keisha would be a temporary White House appointment. So you can't say that the time was short when she went into the job knowing that. But this is the first time a Latina and an African American are at the top of a national presidential campaign. And I also think the folks' connections to the Pritzker family in his role with J.B. Pritzker's gubernatorial campaign as deputy campaign manager, will be very influential in how the convention is planned. And I think it's also interesting that he was a student in President Carter's niece's English class at a time when President Carter occasionally dropped by the class on his bicycle.
All right, we'll leave it there, folks. Up next, Fulton County's district attorney calls for heightened security as possible charges could come this summer in the 2020 election probe.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis says a decision on possible criminal charges stemming from the investigation into whether former President Trump and his allies meddled in the 2020 election in Georgia could come as early as July. In a letter to the Fulton County Sheriff, Willis urges heightened security during this time. Darren, are you surprised about the time frame? Fani Willis says anytime between perhaps July and September.
Well, when we first heard it, you probably thought, just reading the headline, it was imminent. Because usually when people say, all right, hey, Sheriff, hey, county officials, all the people, GBI, State Patrol, let's all start talking about what we're going to do to sort of prevent any possible violence. But now, the July time frame, I had to just trust that the district attorney knows what she's doing. But I would say this, I think Georgia, we better be ready, because we're in play politically for the presidential campaign. And if the former president is indicted and others, then we are going to be just inundated with a lot of negativity and possible protesters.
Well, Martha, it's no surprise, though, I think, if we do see criminal charges stemming from this case.
Yeah, I mean, I was very surprised about the timing too, because my sources have been telling me that it was May, that they were thinking it was going to be May. And so this kind of wider July to September, I mean, there's some politics in that, where closer to the primary time, the more it's going to impact him. But I would not be, I would be surprised if there were not charges in this case. They need to be very careful, though, that it's not like the New York case, because it was like, that was a big nothing burger. I mean, they rolled it out and it looked like the same charge written 34 times, and it really, even Democrats said it wasn't a very good case, and we don't know what's going to happen with that, because they're not going to see that again until December. I expect charges in this case, so we'll just have to see.
Melita, we didn't see much in the way of out-of-control protesters in New York when the former president was charged. What do you anticipate here in Georgia?
Well, I think we've seen a little bit of what a complicated, complex case can be like, with the circus atmosphere surrounding the current gang trial going on at the Fulton County Courthouse. And the other thing we have to remember is that there's probably no courthouse in America more aware of what violence can do and how quickly it can erupt than in Fulton County, because of the tragedy from years ago and the memorial within that courthouse to the people who were killed there. So I think it's smart of Willis to put everybody on notice. Let's plan for this and be ready. Because, you know, the shenanigans won't be the same as in the gang trial, but I think we can expect a heightened atmosphere.
Phil.
Well, I wasn't surprised at the timing, because think about it, that's when the Republican presidential debate is going to be. So she picked it just as a partisan right when they're going to do the Republican debate to step on that. It's going to be another, there will be indictments. You know, the crazy grand jury forewoman said there'd be indictments. By the way, that was supposed to be a secret grand jury, and that has really tainted what's going to be the regular grand jury. So I think what's going to happen, I do agree. I met with Fulton County Sheriff Pat Labatt, and he's already contacting with the Secret Service. They've already said there's going to be indictments. So, but you know what? As I've said before, I mean, you can indict a ham sandwich, but there's no ham in this sandwich. I think even the Democrat attorneys, Martha mentioned it, that are very prominent nationally and here, are saying it's a very, very weak case.
All right, and let's switch gears. A report released this week by the GBI shows there were characteristics of gunshot residue on the hands of the protester shot and killed by troopers during a sweep around the soon-to-be-built Atlanta Public Safety Training Center. According to the DeKalb County Medical Examiner's report, Manuel Terran had at least 57 gunshot wounds. While the Atlanta Police Department released body camera footage that shows audio of the shootout, there is no footage that shows the actual incident, according to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Theron, several Democrats are now calling for further investigation and for state troopers to wear body cameras.
You know, let's just deal with the obvious. No one should be shot 57 times. Now, again, I wasn't there. I'm not, never been in a shootout, thank God. But, when you hear that number, that's very heart-wrenching. And you have to think about what his family would think hearing that he was shot that many times. Maybe some inflicted by others, maybe self-inflicted. That's also what the report didn't, sort of concluded that it could be both of those. But what I'm proud of, though, Lori, is that Atlanta has released the footage. DeKalb County has released the footage. The DeKalb County medical examiner took it a step further to do a chemical test to determine the residue. So now let's get to where we are now, and that is the state of Georgia. Is that I believe that the state troopers that I've talked to, and many of spouses of state troopers have said that I think there's an evolution going on. They believe that you need to have a full spirit of transparency, and I think that you hearing these lawmakers say state troopers need to wear body cameras, it's not necessarily to protect the victims, but it's also to protect the state troopers. And so I think I want to applaud these Democrats, and I'm not sure if any Republicans have come out and said this. Maybe they have, but
I'm for body cameras.
Okay, you are. So you're the first Republican.
I am too. No, a lot of Republicans are
that's
for
progress.
body.
Yeah. So I think we got to do it.
And I think you brought up the good argument on that, is that it's there to also protect law enforcement.
Well, I agree with that. As a former Army military policeman, I think it's helpful to both sides. It's a budget problem, though. This is expensive, and then you got to process the footage, and so I think they'll get it at some point. I'm talking about the state police now. A lot of police departments are going this way. But, I want to just mention to Theron, again, as an Army veteran, and if all of you are my colleagues, and we're told that Antifa and the left-wing radicals in the forest by the construction site of the police training facility want to kill us, you're going into this situation where you could be killed or injured. And so someone is shooting, and all of us should be trained to open fire to nullify that immediately. And that's sad. I'm sorry that it happens, but you have to take out the threat to all of us if we are all in the same situation together, going to try to clean out the forest, because they warned them, get out of the forest. You're breaking the law. And so there's going to have to be a hail of gunfire.
Melita.
Well, I think what's interesting is that the gunpowder residue was only with that microscopic test. There were no visible signs of gunpowder residue. So
it's my understanding that happens.
Right, that happens. But it still stirred up the opposition a good bit on their alternative media sites. But I think the body camera.
But let's be honest, it doesn't take much to stir up that side.
That's true.
And the mainstream media feeds it.
But the body cameras for state troopers is important, and I think it's especially important now that they're having a more visible presence within the metro area, and a new post within the metro area inside 285.
Martha, are we going to see a movement for body cameras on state troopers?
Oh, I think so, because I think what the idea was prior to that is they had the dash cams, and that most of what state troopers do has to do with being on the highway. So this is going to be a transition, and I think they'll do it. And I want to thank, Phil, you're really probably the only one on this panel that's had direct training in this area and understands it, so I appreciate that point of view and your service. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you all brought great perspective on this issue, so thank you. Up next, after almost 10 years, patients in Georgia can legally buy medical marijuana. We'll discuss after the break.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Almost 10 years in the making, Georgia patients who qualify can now legally buy medical marijuana. Martha, a lot of perspective here. I started covering this issue when it reared a little bit, almost 10 years ago. I can't believe it's 10 years to finally see some relief for these patients and their families, to finally be able to buy medical marijuana. Because I remember when it first came up, everybody's like, no way, not in Georgia.
Well, I think it's a shame it took this long. I think what really convinced people was seeing the children that were helped by it, because you could argue that maybe an adult might fake their reaction because they might want to use it or whatever, but a child is not going to fake the progress that they made. So the fact fact it took so long, but still we need farther to go. And this is a little bit different direction, but we've got to do the research on marijuana to find out exactly what it can be used for. It needs to be taken out of the level 1 and moved to where you can do legitimate research, so we've got real data on this. So that needs to be done.
Melita, it was such a sticky process, though, even getting to this point with the licenses.
Absolutely. And Georgia is one of the last states to provide this medical marijuana. And you have 26,000 patients and 19,000 caregivers who've already signed up. And it's interesting to me that one of the greenhouses is in my home county where I grew up.
Interesting. All right. Well, in a feud between some state lawmakers and the university system, Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones has some questions after Chancellor Perdue criticized a $66 million budget cut. The Lieutenant Governor now wants to know what colleges and universities are spending on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Phil.
Well, I think what the genesis of this is what you just said. It was the cut of $66 million in the university system, which is overseeing 26 colleges and universities. And obviously, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a big hot button issue. I think the word equity should be replaced with opportunity, because there's a lot of controversy. This is a big cultural and political fault line in America now. Equity means equal outcomes. Well, wait a minute now. People are different. Opportunity is what we want to foster here, and especially in the educational system. So Burt Jones is only asking questions. Yes, it is a political issue, no question about that. But how much is the expense on this? I did a little research. In Georgia Tech alone, you got 41 staff members doing DEI. Wait a minute, we're supposed to be doing core curriculum, and we're supposed to be having some of the best universities in the country here. There is a bloated bureaucracy. I think everybody would agree with that. And so that's where you cut.
A lot to unpack there. Theron?
I'm glad I heard Phil's explanation first, because, I'm going to reach out to the Lieutenant Governor and I want to talk to him about this, because while he is asking a question, it was what in the question. I mean, he's asking for, the money that's being spent, the staffing, all the different things. And I just want to, just newsflash. Georgia is becoming one of the most diverse states in the country. All right. You cannot stop diversity. You cannot stop equity. You cannot stop inclusion. And it's about fostering an inclusive environment where students and people feel safe for them to be able to enter into higher learning. And I just want to remind people who are asking these questions that it's not too long ago that Black and brown people, particularly Black people, could not enter into a lot of decorated higher education facilities here in the state of Georgia. And so the pushback that you're seeing, Phil, and I'm not attacking you, I'm just saying the pushback is that we see what's happening in Florida. We saw what happened in Tennessee, where you're expelling Democrats. You got the governor of Florida saying, hey, I'm going to take out all diversity and inclusion. I want to wipe out the teachings of African American history. And so with this letter and this question, it's putting Georgia in a very, very tough situation. And corporations who have spent a lot of money, and philanthropic people, to support DEI in colleges and universities, not just HBCUs, it is taking the state backwards. And so I think we got to elevate our thinking around this and say, okay, it's okay to talk about cuts, but when you start talking about taking the word diversity out and replacing it with different,
he's not doing that, though.
But I gave him credit. He just asked a question, and I said I'm going to talk to him. But I want to take it to a bigger level and just say I support Gloria Butler and others, and our former Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, when they came out to warn us that we're going through a slippery slope right now.
Well, and I think, too, there's a lot to unpack with what you said, too. But I do think, really, this saying equity versus equality, or equity versus opportunity, you know as well as I do, you can't guarantee outcomes. You can guarantee opportunity. You can't guarantee outcomes. So I think that's a legitimate issue. But I wish it had been approached, the $66 million. I wish it had been approached where there is bloated administrations, not just in DEI, and all over the place. And I struggled with this when I saw this on the list, because I love the University of Georgia. I love the work that I do there, the volunteer work, the money that I give happily. But I do think there's too much administration, not just at the University of Georgia, but throughout, where there are people that ought to have to justify what they do because the taxpayer's paying for it.
All right.
Just a real quick response.
Really quick.
The Lieutenant Governor isn't going after diversity. He's going after the programs. He's questioning the funding, and he wants to make sure that in programs here, one racial group is not being attacked and the other one is more equal than others.
I got to leave it there because, as Martha said, there's a lot of bloat to go around. So coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
All right, Martha, you've been gone so long, so we'll start with you.
Yeah, I just want to say to Senator Ossoff and Senator Warnock to please heed their leader, Chuck Schumer, of 2011, where they said you go to the table on the debt ceiling. So hopefully they'll listen to 2011 Chuck Schumer. And then my winner this week is an actor named Aspen Kennedy. He was on News Nation this week talking about his faith and how 25-year-olds are getting back to God. And I just want to lift him up.
Hey, Darren.
Oh, good. Okay. First of all, the Atlanta Hawks, good season. Definitely exceeded expectations. Also, State Representative Billy Mitchell, who President Biden, the Presidential Advisory Commission, and on advancing educational equity, excellence, and economic opportunity for Black Americans.
And also, easy for you to say.
I know, right? Trying to get it done because I want to leave time. And then also Coretta Scott King, who had just celebrated her birthday, and a new monument was named after her this week as well.
All right, Phil.
I've got a winner. He's Marcello Sandrini. He is the new owner of Poole's Famous Barbecue up in J, Georgia. It's reopened. A lot of the politicians go up there, and it's great barbecue. And secondly, I got some losers. Melita, you mentioned that young thug gang trial in Fulton County. Well, let me tell you this. I'm upset. They actually arrested one of the lawyers, a lawyer smuggling in drugs to his client. I mean, this is ridiculous, and I'm told that other lawyers might do it. They are total losers. They ought to be disciplined by the bar.
Melita.
Well, my winner is Atlanta OBGYN Nisha Verma, who delivered eloquent testimony about the impact of the 6-week abortion ban in Georgia before the Senate Judiciary Committee earlier this week. And my loser is the Congresswoman from the 14th District, who continues to be such a disruptive force. Her bids for attention are a little bit like a teething toddler, grabbing for everything they can put in their mouth. Fortunately, teething toddlers grow up.
All right. And I just want to give a shout out to Brian Maloof of Manuel's Tavern, because he gave a really nice explanation on why he is raising the prices of the food at his establishment. And I thought it was just a great way to explain to your customers, I have no choice but to do this. So shout out to Manuel's. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.